Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by Litter Robot. Hi friends, I'm very blessed to have Litter Robot as a sponsor. If you're like me and you have cats, we have 3 of them actually, you know how busy life can be and how difficult it can be to follow up on cleaning the litter pan. So I highly recommend Litter Robot. We got our first Litter Robot a couple of years ago, and let me tell you, it's no fuss, no muss, no mess. All you have to do is empty the bag when it sends you a little notification in the app, and you just put the bag out in the garbage, and that's it. You tie it up, throw it out. There's no odor, nothing. Check out the product here at the link given in the video. You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world tonight. We're going to take a look at the mystery of the etheric body. Now, most people don't realize, but this is an important spiritual truth. The etheric body is the threshold of the spiritual world. And tonight we're going to be looking at one of the lectures from Rudolf Steiner dating back to, I believe it was 1909 is when he gave this lecture, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on the date of that. But this lecture is titled The Threshold of the Spiritual World, and certainly the etheric body is the threshold of the spiritual world, and that holds true in the macrocosm as well as the microcosm, and we'll connect some dots for you here tonight, and I'll present you with some little tidbits of information that go along with what Steiner has to say here. So we could flesh this out a little bit better, so we have a more clear understanding of what it is that is conveyed in this very important message given by Rudolf Steiner. Now, many people misunderstand what it is that the etheric body or the etheric nature of everything really is. Well, you see, if you go back to the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, you find that the etheric is a sublayer of this physical material reality. It is the physical plane. It's a subset of the physical plane, and it is of a finer density than the matter that we're familiar with in the dense chemical region of the physical plane in which we exist. So the etheric is a finer type of material or a finer type of matter. And of course, if you go back and you want to look at this from the scientific paradigm or worldview, as is expressed by some of the secret schools here, you'll find in the Rosicrucian system, they claim that there are 7 states of matter. Now, as of right now, we only basically recognize 4 states of matter. We recognize solid, liquid, gas, and now plasma, which according to the Rosicrucians is the first stepping into the etheric portion of reality. Now, I have seen some claims in recent months wherein articles claim that scientists have found a 5th form of matter in this regard as far as the states of matter go. And I don't know how accurate that is or if that's true, because it's very hard to parse what's true and what's false anymore on social media. So I have seen some stories expressing that they claim that they found a 5th state of matter. Now this would also, if that's true, correspond to what the Rosicrucians describe as a portion of the etheric. And certainly plasma, being the 4th state of matter that is readily accepted in this day and age, is the first stepping stones into the etheric realm, or the etheric sublayer of this reality in which we exist. Now, there are principles that have gone along with this for the longest time in the old occult sciences, but you won't hear them discussed in the mainstream. But we're going to talk about some of that here tonight. But without further ado, let's get into the reading here from Rudolf Steiner. Man arrives at the recognition and knowledge of a super-sensible spiritual world by overcoming certain obstacles in the way of such a recognition, which at the outset are present in his soul. The difficulty in this case is due to the fact that these obstacles, though affecting the course of the soul's inner experience, are not apprehended as such by ordinary consciousness. For there are many things present and living in the human soul of which at first it knows nothing, and of which it has to gain knowledge by degrees, just as it does of beings and events belonging to the outer world. Going to pause for a moment. So now Steiner is telling us something important here, that oftentimes this unfoldment of knowledge comes to you gradually through the course of time, and you recognize some things about your inner being that you wouldn't have recognized prior. This is all part of the learning process. We have a rich depth within our soul, this inner world, of which we must learn about the nature thereof, much like the external world. And when we are young, we learn about the external world. Well, as we grow older, we learn more about our internal world as well. And this dichotomy of thought has been around for the longest of times in philosophical circles. You have an inner life experience, and then there's the external world experience that we all share. You see, this macrocosm in which we walk around as the microcosm thereof, we experience the macrocosm, but we experience it through the lens of the microcosm, the inner self, the inner experience, the inner world. So although there's shared elements of the outer world that we all can perceive, our individual experience is unique, and we experience it through the lens of our inner world. Now, all of this may be convoluted and confusing for some to understand, but when you understand that we have this nature of being that expresses beyond just the physical here, it begins to make a little more sense. There are spiritual concerns of which we need to recognize as human beings. It's part of our nature. It's part of who we are. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. Now, the gateway to the nexus point between the physical and the spiritual is the etheric, and this is the important concept that we'll touch on here a little bit later. But let's get back to the reading. The spiritual world, before it is perceived and recognized by the soul, is to the latter something quite strange and unfamiliar, the qualities of which have nothing in common with what the soul is able to learn through its experiences in the physical world. Thus it comes about that the soul may be confronted with the spiritual world and may see in it an absolute void. The soul may feel as though it were looking into an infinite, blank, desolate abyss. Now, this feeling actually exists in those depths of the soul of which it is at first unconscious. The feeling is something like fear and dread, and the soul lives in it without being aware of the fact. Going to pause for a moment here. So now Steiner is telling us that our soul, the development thereof, in the beginning we are unconscious of that development of the soul life. This is something that transcends physical reality here in the five senses we're familiar with of the physical reality. And oftentimes it is associated with these negative emotions like fear and dread. This is why people fear the unknown. This right here offers us a key into the understanding of why it is that the social controllers of this world use fear as one of the primary programming elements here. They want us trapped in this physical paradigm, not considering the spiritual. They don't want us to spiritually awaken and be aware of our soul life. They want us to only be aware of the physical around us. Because, you see, to keep us in that state of unconsciousness makes us more easy to control. It turns us into a sort of automaton. And that is exactly what they want in this world in order to fulfill their agendas, these dark occultists who run things in this world, and their minions, the technocrats that run around here, doing all sorts of things to further their agendas. But at any rate, let's go ahead and continue with the reading. For the life of the soul is determined not only by what it knows, but by that which is actually present within it, without its knowledge. Now, when the soul searches in the sphere of thought for reasons for disproving and for evidence against the spiritual world, it does so not because those reasons are conclusive in themselves, but because it is seeking for a kind of narcotic to dull the feeling just described. People do not deny the existence of the spiritual world or the possibility of attaining knowledge of it as a result of being able to prove its non-existence, but because they desire to fill their souls with thoughts which will deceive them and rid them of their dread of the spiritual world. Liberation from this longing for a materialistic narcotic for deadening the dread of the spiritual world cannot be gained till a survey is made of the whole circumstances of this part of the soul's life, as here described, and quote, I don't know who Steiner is quoting here, but it says, "Materialism as a psychic phenomenon of fear is an important chapter in the science of the soul." Going to pause for a moment right here. The Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by 80stees.com. Hi friends, if you're a Gen Xer like me, you've probably been looking for just the perfect shirt, referencing back to some pop culture event back in the 1980s and having a hard time doing so. Well, the good news is everything you could think of relating to 80s nostalgia is available now in a high-quality clothing line at 80stees.com. You can find all sorts of pop culture references from the 80s there, and it brings back a lot of fond memories for me. So check it out at the link in the video here below. Now, Steiner continues, and he says, "This dread of the spiritual becomes intelligible when we have won our way through to a recognition of the spiritual. When we have come to see that the events and beings of the physical world are the outward expression of supersensible spiritual events and beings. We arrive at this understanding when we can see that the body belonging to man, which is perceptible to the senses and with which alone ordinary science is concerned, is the expression of a subtle, supersensible, or etheric body, in which the material or physical body is enclosed like a denser nucleus, as though in a cloud." And I'm going to pause for a moment, and this right here is the key. You see, in order for expression or manifestation in the material physical world in which we are familiar, this dense chemical region thereof, first, it expresses in the etheric. This is the important precept that Steiner is laying down. And I've come to discover, through the course of time, in my studies, that there is a time delay between the expression or the manifestation in the etheric and the manifestation in the physical. And sometimes this time delay varies. Sometimes it takes a very long time in terms of how we're familiar with measuring time, years, decades, sometimes before something that happens in the etheric expresses in materiality in the physical dense region here. All of this is foundational to understanding the nature of manifestation of a thing in the physical. Now, I know a lot of this may be a bridge too far for some people to understand or to accept as being the truthful notion of how things come to pass in this physical world. They would like to think and believe that our science, our modern science, has everything all figured out and everything could be explained away as some physical cause and effect sequence, disregarding the spiritual altogether. Well, that is a mistaken ideology, as we will see here. Many of these things have been time-tested and proven to the occult sciences from antiquity forward. And this is one of the keys that they keep hidden from the masses in achieving some of the goals that they would like to achieve. They use these principles all the time to bring about the agendas and the activities in this world that they want to see. I'm speaking, of course, about these social controllers, these dark occultists who run things in this world, and their minions, the technocrats. They utilize these esoteric principles to get things done, these old occult ways of thinking. They know how to leverage the energetic principles in a much better way than you and I understand. And they know it has to do with the stepping down process from the etheric into physicality here. So that being the case, let's continue reading here and see what else Steiner can tell us about this notion of the etheric body. For it is a great mystery, and we need to have a better perception of what goes on with this etheric and how it affects us here in the physical five senses world we're familiar with. The etheric body is the second principle of human nature. It forms the basis of the life of the physical body. But as regards his etheric body, man is not cut off from its corresponding outer world to the same extent to which his physical body is detached from the physical outer world. Going to pause for a moment just to translate that a little bit for you. So man's etheric body has a larger attachment to the etheric realm, the world all around about it, than man's physical body has within the physical world. You see, in this dense physical body in which we exist, we are individuated and separated from the external factors. In the etheric, it's not so much. We have more overlapping between the etheric body and the etheric layer of reality. So the external and the internal, they gel and they mesh together at certain points in the etheric, whereas in the physical, all of that is separated. We have this sort of wall built around us in this physical form that separates all of the external things from the internal things. And this is something that is a great mystery to be explored about the nature of consciousness itself. So that being said, let's get back to the reading and see if Steiner can explain this a little better for us. When we speak of an outer world in connection with the etheric body, it is not the physical outer world perceived by the senses that is meant, but a spiritual environment which is as supersensible in relation to the physical world as man's etheric body is in relation to his physical body. Man, as an etheric being, stands in an etheric or elemental world. Gonna pause for a moment here. So now this is where the rubber meets the road. This is what we need to understand. So even though our physical conscious nature is largely unaware of our etheric soul nature, we can understand that this etheric soul nature has more awareness of the spiritual world around us. It has a connection to it. This is a hugely important idea. Let's go ahead and continue with our reading here. Man is always experiencing the fact, although in ordinary life he knows nothing of it, that he, as an etheric being, inhabits an elemental world. When he becomes conscious of this state of things, the consciousness is quite different from that of ordinary experience. This new consciousness sets in when man becomes clairvoyant. Going to pause for a moment here. Now, whether or not you agree with the nature of this, you need to understand there's people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these concepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs in these concepts will affect all of us, so it's important you understand it. I think there may be some truth to the notion of clairvoyance to a certain degree. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But there are those who claim to be able to use these supersensible abilities to sense things within the spiritual, and it gives them a better and more accurate view of things going on. I don't know exactly what that looks like or how that manifests or how that actually operates functionally. But these are the claims made by Steiner and others, that they can use this clairvoyant ability in order to sense things that happen in the spiritual realms around us, and that eventually bring about changes in the physical world. As I said, I think there is a notion of truth to this, and perhaps we all have this type of ability latent within us if we just open up our perceptions to recognizing some of the spiritual cues around us. Recognizing things like intuition as being accurate and fundamentally sound. Most people don't trust their intuition because we've been taught to not trust our intuition, largely because of our modern science. Our modern science tells us things are a certain way, even though we don't perceive them that way. So it tells us we can't trust our senses. And if we don't trust our physical senses, well, how would we trust our super sensible intuitions? This is one of the things that becomes problematic by using the scientific paradigm, the modern advent of scientism, more rightly called, in the information gathering aspects of things. We tend to lose sight of more spiritual abilities in that way, intuition being key among that. Intuition is something that goes beyond the auspices of logical scientific reasoning, but we do find that when you get that gut feeling, oftentimes it's correct. Is that not so? Don't we experience that all the time? Well, there's a reason for this. It has to do with the supersensible worlds and with the etheric gateway to perceiving them. Let's continue. The clairvoyant then knows about that which is always present in life, though hidden from ordinary consciousness. Now, in his ordinary consciousness, man calls himself I, as in a capital I, signifying the being which presents itself in his physical body. The healthy life of his soul in the world of the senses depends on his thus recognizing himself as a being separated from the rest of the world. That healthy psychic life would be interrupted if he characterized any other events or beings of the outer world as part of his ego. When man realizes himself as an etheric being in the elemental world, things are different. Then his own ego being blends with certain occurrences and beings around him. The etheric human being has to find himself in that which is not his inner being, in the same sense as inner is conceived in the physical world. In the elemental world, there are forces, occurrences, and beings which, although in certain respects part of the outer world, must yet be considered as belonging to one's own ego. As etheric human beings, we are woven into the elemental essence of the world. In the physical world, we have our thoughts, with which we are so bound up that we may look upon them as forming a constituent part of our ego. But there are forces, occurrences, and so forth, which act as intimately upon the inner nature of the etheric human being as thoughts do in the physical world, and which do not behave like thoughts, but are like beings living with and in the soul. Going to pause for a moment here. So now you understand something a little bit more clearly. Your thoughts that we have are not the be-all, end-all of the explanation for intuitions and inspirations that we sometimes get. There is a spiritual factor involved. And sometimes we're reading the zeitgeist. I think that's the best way to term this. Your etheric body is able to read the information field of the etheric plane or the etheric layer of this reality and detect certain spiritual things within it. And this translates into being able to read the zeitgeist. Now, this aligns very heavily with the concept that I have come to term synchromystic metadata. This synchromystic metadata is, in essence, some of these spiritual influences within the etheric region that you can detect through intuitive processes and through having some knowledge of the secret language that the occult fraternities use on an external material world paradigm. Then you can read the metadata in the zeitgeist. And a lot of it has to do with leaning into your intuition, recognizing something looks askew. This is all part and parcel of what Steiner is expressing here, in my view. I think certainly this is what he's talking about to one degree or another. Now, does this classify as clairvoyance, as he calls it. I don't think it necessarily does, but maybe it touches upon some of the same principles. If you recognize an element out there in the greater zeitgeist, the information field all around us, and you're able to pick that out and explore the avenue of thought through your intuition and through perhaps even some research in the physical world here, you can learn a little bit of something about that. A lot of this has to do with the etymology of words. This is what I've discovered through the course of time. When you pick up on this symbol in the zeitgeist, if you explore it back to its roots, you find out what's the core meaning behind it. And once you know the core meaning, then you could apply that to things happening in the physical world here and be able to relate some spiritual connotation to it. And that's largely what this decoding of the synchromystic metadata entails. It's about reading these cues in the zeitgeist, and I hope I'm not losing you out there on this. I know some of this may be a bridge too far for some people to consider, especially when you've been very much indoctrinated into the scientific paradigm that the modern age holds. You often cast aside some of these more philosophical ways of thinking, or you cast aside the spiritual concerns and the connection to the spiritual that goes with many of those philosophical concerns. So I hope I'm not losing people on this. But certainly I think that is the notion of what Steiner is expressing here. Let's continue. He says, therefore, clairvoyance needs a stronger inner force than that which the soul possesses for the purpose of maintaining its own independence in the face of its thoughts. And the essential preparation for true clairvoyance consists in so strengthening and invigorating the soul inwardly that it can be conscious of itself as an individual being, not only in the presence of its own thoughts, but also when the forces and beings of the elemental world enter the field of its consciousness as if they were part of its own being. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. So now, a lot of this has to do with being able to recognize what are your own thoughts and what are the thoughts or inspirations of others that are affecting you from outside in this etheric field. This, in and of itself, is a massively important concept, that you can be influenced externally in the etheric field with thoughts or beliefs. How many of your ideas are your own? How many of your thoughts are your own? This is what Steiner is telling us. Those who know how to manipulate this etheric field can bombard your soul with thought forms that are not your own, and you will think that this is you thinking this. These are your own thoughts or opinions. This is one of the ways in which the secret controllers of this world manipulate public opinion. It's always a spiritual battle. The Bible told us the truth. It's a spiritual battle at its core. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers in dark regions within the spiritual. This is one of the ways in which we're influenced, and all of this has to do with this nexus point or gateway that exists as the etheric sublayer of this reality. And through this etheric sublayer, those social programmers of this world can affect the way you think and make you believe that you are the source of the idea, that it is your opinion you are expressing, when in fact it is the opinions of others who bombard you in the spiritual nature with these thought forms, these active thought forms, which are a type of artificial elemental. Now, you can read more about this, and perhaps we'll cover this. We've covered some of this in the past. This is what they teach within the circles of theosophy and within the Rosicrucian system and the various other occult fraternities. They all approach these same concepts, and they use different names or descriptions for them, but it's all the same thing. Thought forms are artificial elementals that can influence you from outside. if they get within your auric field, as expressed here by Steiner. Now think about that. This is why sometimes things like memes have an influence on people. It's a thought form that is sent out in the etheric, and even though you may be largely unaware of the mimetic influence, you are in fact influenced by it. This is also explanatory of things like the 100th monkey effect. You may have heard of this. Well, why is it that these same ideas express remotely from one another without contact having been made physically between two beings, but they still come up with the same idea at the same time? Well, this is exactly why, because it's transmitted through the etheric. This is one of the keys of manifestation in this world, ladies and gentlemen. You're hearing some important truths here tonight, and I can't express adequately enough how important this truly is, and most people will disregard this, will laugh it off and say this is silly or this is nonsensical, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. This is part of the indoctrination and social programming that's gone on for generations now. We have been taught to disregard anything that has this type of spiritual essence behind it. We've been taught to balk at this stuff, that it's silly, it's nonsensical. They would want you to believe that, because that gives them a tool that they can use against you, because you are largely unaware of how it works or why it works. And once you know about this tool that they've been manipulating for the longest time, it has less influence on you. Then you can begin to recognize what are your own thoughts as compared to what are external thoughts that are affecting you from elsewhere. This is one of the keys to true understanding in this world in which we live. Now, here's the catch of all of it, though. Not all of these external thought forms that influence us from outside within the etheric realm are necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we need to all be on the same page in this physical world so that we can manifest the things that we want, the changes that we want within it. That's why the term zeitgeist exists. It's the spirit of the time. It doesn't have to be a bad spirit or a negative thing, although it's largely always been presented to us as a negative type of connotation. At least in the modern era. It hasn't always been that way, though. The zeitgeist can be a powerful influence, and it can bring about good. And we can still turn the zeitgeist to the good, even though largely it's been manipulated by those that have evil agendas at the topmost levels of the power structure of this world, those that I call the dark occultists who run things, and their minions, the technocrats that run around here setting policy and trying to bring into fruition certain manifestations in this physical world that will further sever us from our spiritual connection and enslave us into physical reality, separated from the spiritual. I know it's a bridge too far for many to think of this, but this has been explored by the occultists and philosophers of the past. Steiner himself called it the eighth sphere. This is what they're attempting to build. The old Hermeticists called this the world of shells. It's a physical world devoid of spirit. And what they are actively doing right now, these dark occultists who run things, and their minions, the technocrats, they're attempting to build a synthetic etheric layer of this reality. They call it metaverse. At least that was one of the early names they tried to apply to it. Didn't go over well with Zuckerberg involved, and they've now kind of steered away from that name, but make no mistake about it, they are still building these Web 3.0 infrastructures And this digital sublayer of this reality is an artificial synthetic knockoff of the etheric layer. And that's why they want everybody bound in to the system, the beast system, via BCI devices, that's brain-computer interfaces, that will connect your brain to the digital neocortex, because this is how they are attempting to hijack the system and create a synthetic knockoff of this etheric layer in which ideas and thought forms can influence from the outside and come into real physical world manifestation. While they're trying to do that in a completely artificial way, separated from the spiritual, so that they can have total control and they can separate all spiritual concerns from this physical realm and build the eighth sphere, the world of shells. It's a very dark agenda, ladies and gentlemen. And if you haven't been following this program for any length of time, you may be scratching your head as to what the implications are. Well, we'll get to that as we proceed here a little further. We're going to pause for a brief moment here. The Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by Books A Million. We cover a lot of books on this program. So if you're looking for some place to purchase many of these books that we read from, you can check out Books A Million at the link given in the video below. Let's continue. Now that force of the soul, by means of which it maintains its position as a being in the elemental world, is present in man's ordinary life. The soul at first knows nothing of this force, although possessing it. In order to possess it consciously, the soul must first prepare itself. It must acquire that inner force of the soul which is gained during the preparation for clairvoyance. As long as a man cannot make up his mind to acquire this inner force, he has a quite comprehensible dread of recognizing his spiritual environment, and he, unconsciously, has recourse to the illusion that the spiritual world does not exist or cannot be known. This illusion delivers him from his instinctive dread of the growing together or blending of his own individual essence or ego being with an actual outer spiritual world. One who sees into the facts which have been described comes to recognize an etheric human being behind the physical human being, and a supersensible etheric or elemental world behind the one that is physically perceptible. I'm going to pause for a moment just to point out the fact that the Bible even mentions this. You see, we are told that we see as in a mirror darkly right now. This is one of the things which is inferred in that verse. Behind all of the physical world, five senses reality we experience here in this dense chemical physical region of reality, there is a spiritual reflection behind it that will impart more truth about the nature of it than what we see in the physical. So behind the manifestation in the physical, there is this spiritual element. There is this etheric element. Look at it this way. Let's use the analogy of a puppet. When you look at the puppet, you see the puppet moving about on the world stage, but you don't see the hand controlling the puppet. The etheric is the hand controlling the puppet. This analogy is probably a good description of what goes on. And on a conscious level, in this physical reality, we don't recognize the hand controlling the puppet. We only see the puppet. This is largely what goes on the world stage in the political theater of the mind. You don't see the hand that controls it. And why is that? Because it's something spiritual behind the scenes that steers and manipulates agendas in this world. It's not necessarily a small select group of human beings, although there are a small select group of human beings that have a lot of sway and influence. But behind the scenes, it's spiritual influences that are largely setting up all of the different agendas that we see in play in the world. A non-human intelligence that guides it. And this non-human intelligence that guides it is also aligned with various human intelligences that want to follow the dictates of this non-human intelligence to bring these things into fruition. And this all manifests as these types of intrusive thought forms in the etheric that affect other people's minds, the masses, those largely unaware of it. And public opinion is swayed using these old occult sciences, and most people are completely ignorant that it goes on. Or they don't want to believe that it goes on. It goes against their belief systems. It flies in the face of their worldview. Because largely today, our worldview is based upon science. The material sciences, scientism. That science that completely disregards all spiritual aspects of things and the existence of spiritual realms. Now, they may acknowledge some of this as the expression of, say, I don't know, they'll claim that there's a multiverse or that there's other dimensions of reality, but of course, any kind of a connotation that there's something spiritual involved with that or it has any influence here would be nonsensical in the eyes of our modern science. Although they claim there can be as many as 11 dimensions in some of the sciences they put forward, they don't see how anything here is influenced by those. Of course, that is until you get to things like quantum physics that they try to use to compartmentalize these effects from other dimensions here. But I digress on that point. They always come up with these reifications and these objective ways of trying to measure those things that are subjective, simply because that gives them more control of it. Even if it's not an accurate description of what's truly happening, it gives them some type of generalized control of a thing if they could quantify it in such a way. So that's why they make the attempts. But at any rate, I digress on that point. Let's get back to the reading here and see what else Steiner can tell us. Steiner says, clairvoyant consciousness finds in the elemental world real beings which up to a certain point have independence, just as physical consciousness finds thoughts in the physical world which are unreal and have no independence. Growing familiarity with the elemental world leads to seeing these partially independent beings in closer connection with each other. Just as someone may first look upon the limbs of a physical human body as partially independent and afterwards acknowledge them to be parts of the body as a whole, so to clairvoyant consciousness are the several beings of the elemental world embraced within one great spiritual body of which they are living members. In the further course of clairvoyant experience, that body comes to be recognized as the elemental, supersensible, etheric body of the earth. Within the earth's etheric body, an etheric human being feels himself to be a member of a whole. Going to pause for a moment here. So now using the law of analogy once again that the Hermeticists like to use, we can see this comparison of the microcosm to the macrocosm, that if we look at what we know in scientific terms about the human body, we are made up of all these individual cells or parts that work together to bring about the greater good for the greater whole. Now, using this law of analogy, we can find that we, as individual human beings, are each constituent parts of the earth. The earth itself has its own etheric body. All of the different portions of the known universe have their own etheric bodies or forms. And here's the thing. All of these etheric bodies interact in the etheric plane. They overlap one another. And communication can go on in an intuitive sense in that way to these different individual parts in the etheric layer. Now, this is something that is also massively important when you're looking at black budget science ideas. I know this may be a bridge too far for some to consider. and maybe I'm losing you a little bit out there, but things like field theory and field propulsion, they all become intricately woven into this etheric field. Because if you can access that etheric field and everything is interconnected in the etheric field, that would make it possible to achieve almost instantaneous travel from one far region to another by accessing the etheric. This is part of the secret sciences that have gone on behind the scenes, the special access program sciences, in the auspices of the military-industrial complex. Although many of the people involved, the researchers and scientists involved, probably don't know the old occult sciences relating to this or what it really means, as we're expressing and exploring here, but they do recognize that there is an inherent effect, and that all things are interconnected in this way. So even though in the dense chemical, physical region in which we live, everything is individuated, if you can access the etheric portion of this reality, you can make a jump from one physical location to another almost instantaneously. If you could develop some type of a technological means or a magical means of doing that, and of course we have all kinds of supernatural reports of antiquity, of the ability of magicians to perhaps teleport from one place to another. This stuff exists, it's out there, it's recorded in various places, especially within the auspices of the secret schools, the secret society groups, the occult fraternities. But it's also something that has been heavily explored by our modern physical sciences, and they don't quite understand how it actually works. But they have seen some results. And this all relates, and it has to do everything with the spirit, the soul of man, the interconnectedness of all things. We are connected to this etheric field. They know this. Many of the dark occultists who run things in this world, and some of the topmost technocrats, they know this. They know that this etheric region is the interconnected field in which all of us are attached, and that they could influence us in certain ways using that field. Like I said, I know this is probably a bridge too far for most people to think in these terms, but I assure you, this is largely what's going on behind the scenes at the topmost levels of power in this world. You may not want to accept that. That's your prerogative. You can do with this information whatever you would like. But understand, even if you don't accept this information and you don't think it's accurate or real, and you reject that, but what you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these concepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs in these concepts will affect all of us. So it's important that you understand it. It's important that I put it out there on the table for you to take a serious look at. We all need to consider these ideas. Let's not be dismissive of these things, because these things might be of the utmost importance to our future as human beings. We stand at a crossroads, a precipice in this world where certain changes are coming down the pike at us. And we're going to have to face these head on, and it's an individual choice each of us needs to make. There are those with agendas that do not align with our best interests, who are out there pushing certain ideas and notions on people, and they largely think that it's for the betterment of themselves. And they'll latch on to these ideas, or they'll think that somehow these ideas are good and will lead to a better future. But by and large, it's only for the select few at the top of the power structure to be the beneficiaries thereof. They leverage the etheric field to influence public opinion, as I've said earlier, and to steer people in the wrong direction. But there is a sort of awakening going on, and people are becoming more aware of these things that have long been hidden behind the veil from us by these controllers of this world for a very, very long time. We are living in the time of revelation, and all of these things are becoming visible out in the open. And people, since the onset of the whole COVID scamdemic they unleashed upon us, have becoming more receptive to understanding there's something deeper going on here. They're more open to hearing these types of ideas now than they were in the past. You see, their minds were locked in the physical paradigm for the longest time. But it's only because those dark occultists who run things and their minions, the technocrats, that have all of these different agendas and want to have total and absolute control and to build their new world order, this world of shells, this eighth sphere reality. They know they're running out of time, that their window of opportunity is almost expired, so they've been pushing too hard. And in pushing too hard, they've inadvertently awakened the minds of a lot more people to understanding some of these spiritual truths, to look deeper than the physical five senses reality world we see around about us, to look beyond the political machinations and look beyond all of the distractions, to see the spirit behind it. So I'm very hopeful that we can still turn this thing around. There's a lot more people than what they anticipated who are awake and aware of the tools they are using now to get things done, and they're fighting back. Let's go ahead, though, and we'll continue with reading from Steiner here. Steiner says, "This progress in clairvoyance is a process of growing familiar with the nature of the elemental world. That world is inhabited by beings of the most widely different kinds. If we desire to express the activity of these force beings, we can only do it by portraying their various peculiarities in pictures. Amongst them are beings which are found to be allied with everything which makes for endurance, solidity, and weight. They may be designated as earth souls, and if we do not think ourselves otherwise, and are not afraid of an image which only points to reality and is not really itself, we may speak of them as gnomes." I'm going to pause for a moment here. Now, Steiner is getting into the notion of elementals being inhabitants of this etheric layer. We've done some shows in the past speaking of the elementals. I did an entire 3-part series early on in my earliest days of YouTube called Unseen Forces, where we read about the acknowledgement of elementals from the perspective of the secret society groups. Now Steiner's touching upon that. These elementals, these are intelligences, intelligent forces that reside in the etheric. They can have certain effects on this physical material world that go largely unrecognized by modern science. It's part of the intelligence that makes these things, these natural forces of this world, come to fruition. Nature has inherent intelligence. That's what this is relating to. This is part of those inherent intelligences that guide and direct the sequences that occur in nature. Why do you think that the elements of this world know what season it is? Why do you think things always happen when they're supposed to? Look at the 4 seasons as a perfect example of this. In the fall, the trees begin to change color and lose their leaves, like clockwork, despite temperatures and things like that. It always happens when it's supposed to. That's because of these inherent intelligences, these elemental intelligences as being described here by the secret sciences. And these are very much secret sciences. This has been hidden from mankind for a long time. And we've actually been indoctrinated into thinking of these ways of thinking as silly, nonsensical, fairy tales. It's not. I don't know how you could look at the machinations of this natural world around us and claim that there's no intelligence behind it. It all kind of came about by random happenstance. One day, nothing exploded and became everything, and everything kind of began to interact with one another in a synchronistic type fashion, and all of this came to be, and life was produced from non-life. It's a nonsensical way of thinking in and of itself, but that is our modern scientific paradigm. There are intelligent forces at the backside of nature, of natural processes. That's what this is telling us. So first, Steiner goes on to talk about these earthbound essences called gnomes. Like I said, we did a 3-part series about this early on, and perhaps we'll revisit this topic at some point in the near future, because I find the intelligent forces behind the machinations of nature fascinating. I think the idea of elementals is a fascinating idea to consider. But at any rate, let's get back to what Steiner has to say here. He says, "We also find beings which are so constituted that they may be designated as air, water, and fire souls. Then again, other beings appear. It is true that they so manifest themselves that they seem to be elemental or etheric beings, yet it may be seen that there is something in their etheric nature which is of higher quality than the essence of the elemental world. We learn to understand that it is as impossible to apprehend the real nature of these beings with the degree of clairvoyance sufficient only for the elemental world, as it is to arrive at the true nature of man with merely physical consciousness." I'm going to pause for a moment. So now Steiner acknowledges this notion of elementals. They are these etheric forces, etheric intelligent forces that have influence in the physical world. And they are real souls or soul beings that exist. A lot of this is too much for people to consider. People don't want to consider invisible worlds or realms around us that are inhabited by other non-human beings or intelligences. They don't want to think in that way because that creates a lot of uncertainty, and that creates a lot of the unknown. And that creates a lot of discomfort for those people who think they have it all figured out. Those within the auspices of the material sciences. They don't want to consider intelligence at back of these physical forces. But they are most certainly present according to the occultists and according to those who have delved heavily into this way of thinking for the longest time. Let's continue. The beings mentioned above, which may figuratively be called earth, water, air, and fire souls, are, with the activity proper to them, situated in a certain respect within the earth's elemental etheric body. Their tasks lie there, but the beings of a higher nature which have been characterized carry their activity beyond the earth sphere. If we come to know them better through clairvoyant experience, we ourselves and our consciousness are carried in the spirit beyond the sphere of earth. We see how this earth sphere has been developed from another, and how it is evolving within itself spiritual germs, so that in time to come, a further sphere, in a sense of a new earth, may arise out of it. Gonna pause for a moment. A new earth, and this is called the Jupiter period in the Rosicrucian model that is expressed. A new earth will be formed, and of course, the plan of the dark occultists who run things and the technocrats in this world, the ones who are controlling things right now to a large degree, their plan is to build a separate offshoot from this new Jupiter period, and it's called the Eighth Sphere by Steiner. It will be completely separated from the rest of the spiritual evolution of this universe, of this creation, from the way it's supposed to go. And they plan on building their own version of reality, a physical paradigm devoid of spiritual concerns, devoid of spiritual causation, an automaton, a dead entity. It is the reign of dead matter, as Michael Hoffman so aptly calls it. This is what they're trying to develop. The Hermeticists, as I have expressed earlier, call it the world of shells. It's a dead entity, an empty shell. And what is the true nature of this? Well, it would seem there are some dark forces involved with it, and it's all about these dark forces trying to escape their ultimate fate. They want to escape judgment from the Creator for the things they've done that violate the natural order of things. So they want to manifest themselves in a physical essence, an immortal physical shell, in which they could be the gods of this physical reality and be able to appease their animalistic cravings, to appease their fleshly nature with pleasures of all sorts. And they think somehow they can escape judgment by doing this, when they are sadly and sorely mistaken. But in their hubris, they think they could pull it off through the use of advanced technologies and using the old occult sciences as a vehicle to get it done. That's the nature of what's going on. That's the whole nature of this whole transhumanist philosophy that has emerged in recent years. That's the end game. That's why they want everybody tied to a computer. What this really is it's not so much about imparting immortality to you, as they will tell you, through the use of these transhumanist technologies. It's the great culling in disguise. Even pro-transhumanists acknowledge this. There is a pro-transhumanist YouTube channel out there called Transhumania. Several years ago, they put out a documentary film which is about 4.5 hours long. If my memory serves me correctly, about 20-some minutes into this film that they put out on this channel, they tell you in no uncertain terms what transhumanism really is, and they say in their own words, quote, "Transhumanism is eugenics without coercion," end quote. That's the true nature of what this whole transhumanist push is, and it has everything to do with these dark spiritual forces at play here. They want to convince enough people that if you, quote-unquote, take the mark and become part of this transhumanist future, you attach your brain through a BCI device to the digital neocortex, that you will have immortality. You'll live forever. You will be unfettered by the bounds of the limitations of the human body and be able to exist in perpetuity, having a type of immortality in the physical. This is what they espouse to you. They tell you that you can transfer your consciousness into the machine, into the cloud, and live forever. It's a lie. All this will do is this will take all of your biometric information, eventually all of your thought patterns and things like that they could measure physically through the material sciences, and they will transform it into a computer algorithm, and they will duplicate your personality in the machine, but that is not really you. That's not your soul or spirit living on in that machine. That is not the ontological self, the I am within man. It's a cheap synthetic knockoff, but it will contain all of your memories and experiences and all of those objectively measurable physical things that can perhaps be translated into electrical pulses and recorded through machinery and transcribed into a computer. And enough people will be convinced that that synthetic knockoff is really you, that they too will sign up for this digital immortality. And it's a deception. It's a dead entity. And the real trick behind all of this is the whole trick of switching places by these dark spirits in the underworld that want to inhabit this physical eighth sphere, using your shell as a vehicle of manifestation for themselves in order so that they can escape judgment. But here's where the trick lies. They want you to switch places with them so that your soul, your spirit, descends into these dark places in their place and suffers their punishment instead. That is their intention. Now, like I said, this is a bridge too far for most people to consider. I understand that. You can reject this outright if you want. But understand this. There are people in positions of power in this world, and I can't emphasize this enough, that believe in these precepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs affect all of us. So it's important that you understand it and you know it. And the most important aspect of this that you can know is that it's a lie. It's the great lie. Transhumanism will not impart to you immortality and transcendence. It's a fugazi, as my friend Crow says. It's a synthetic, cheap knockoff. It won't be you that exists at that point anymore. But all of your information, your memories, your thoughts, your experiences, your feelings, your emotions will be vampirized by the big machine and duplicated in synthetic format. But your soul and essence will not live on within that. That's the true nature of it. You see, ladies and gentlemen, all of this stuff aligns very much with real technocratic agendas that are going on today, and most people don't want to recognize the occult aspect of this, the spiritual aspect of this. It makes them uncomfortable to think in this way. But I assure you, there are those in positions of power, those dark occultists who run things in this world, that are very much aware of all of this and have weaponized all of this against the masses. And that is their true intention. They want to bring into being the manifestation of these dark entities, intelligences, forces, spirits, from the lower regions, the dark side. They want to bring those into existence in the physical world, to give them a vehicle for manifestation here, because by and large, these dark occultists who run things at the topmost levels of the power structure are influenced from the other side by these beings, entities, intelligences already. Or they are possessed by them already. And they want to bring about a more practical means of manifesting in physicality than depending upon the dark magicians, those who are trying to seek power in this way, to try to have some type of power, authority. You see, there's not an awful lot of them, but there are enough of them that some of these entities can possess and indwell within to start to bring about changes. But there's a lot of these intelligences, forces, dark entities that would very much like to come to manifestation in the physical, more so than there are these dark magicians, these dark occultists who run things. So in order for them to manifest, they have to put certain frameworks in place in this physical world. And right now they're trying to use technology to do what the occultists have failed to do en masse. And they want to make it possible so that these entities can indwell a physical vehicle and manifest here without depending upon some power-hungry dark magician to do so. That's what this whole push for transhumanism is really about at its spiritual core. Now, you could take all of this with a grain of salt if you'd like. You can discard this information. You could disregard it altogether. What you do with it is your prerogative. I'm just presenting it to you as neutral information. These are the things I've found through researching, exploring, and reading through the source materials of these secret society groups and connecting the dots intuitively with all of this and understanding what's behind the wheel, figuratively here, with all of it. This is what I've noticed, what I've seen, what seems to be happening. Now, I hope I'm wrong on everything, but the preponderance of evidence points to otherwise. So, like I said, you can disregard all of this as the musings of a madman if you'd like, but I think that's a big mistake. We need to consider the spiritual ramifications of the things that are happening in this world. And many of these things, they keep pushing on us. They push on us in the name of what they call the quote-unquote greater good. And in promoting it as the greater good, they are causing irreparable harms to individuals. And that's the important point here. You see, our true destiny as human beings are to be individuated souls, still connected to our spiritual source, the creator of this universe, God. We are to have this spiritual connection, but still be individuated beings. Individuals, unique in this creation, but still having this connection back to source. That's our true destiny. Now, those controlling things today are trying to rob us of that destiny and turn us into an automaton, a robot, a dead entity, a shell, to be indwelt by something else, by a spirit that does not naturally belong in this reality. That's what they're attempting to do. Like I said, probably a bridge too far for most people to consider, but we need to learn to look at these ideas and consider them without bias, without our inherent belief systems being necessarily affected by it. This is a skill that a lot of people have lost in this day and age. You can objectively consider information and look at it without necessarily completely ingratiating it into your own worldview. You could look at it neutrally. Find, is this objectively true? Are these things really happening to one degree or another? Is there some notion of truth to the things being declared? You can use discernment and understand some things. But to completely and wholly disregard something outright and reject it without exploring it for yourself is the height of hubris and ignorance. You can't just say, that's preposterous, without having investigated for yourself. My mission is to encourage people to think for themselves and to explore these ideas on their own and come to your own conclusions about it. I don't want to tell anybody what to think. That's not my job here. But my job here is to make you think. I won't tell you what to think, but I want to make you think, and think clearly, and think deeply, on these topics that are the ones of true importance. Who are we? What is our destiny? Where are we going? Why are the things in this world happening that are happening? You see, it's my mandate to expose evil where I see it, and by and large, there are many evil influences that are very directly steering agendas in this world right now, from the highest, most levels of power. And we need to take back our future, because what they have in mind for us is not in our best interests as human beings, as sovereign souls, spiritual beings with a connection to our Creator. It's not in our best interests to follow the path that they're trying to lay for us. So part of that process of correcting the course is recognizing these concepts, things like the mystery of the etheric body and the etheric field, and recognize the reality that does exist behind it, even though it has only been touched upon in mainstream science and only generally within the special access programs of the black budget sciences in the military-industrial complex. They recognize the importance of this. There's a reason they keep it under wraps. They don't want people to know about this stuff. They've been developing secret technologies based upon these models of reality, the etheric field. They know about it. They've known about it for a long time. But they don't want the average person to know about it. They want the average person to think that it's silly or it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's not silly. It is a real source field from which intelligence, human intelligence, can have a connection to the spiritual, to the other realities, the invisible worlds round about us, and have more access and understanding of how things truly operate and manifest in this world. But you see, if those secrets get out, then those controllers of this world at the topmost levels, these small group of elites that want to maintain their grip on control and power in this world, will lose their grip on power. They don't want that. That's why they keep this stuff under wraps. But thankfully, Rudolf Steiner has given us a lot of good information in very many of his lectures that he's given. So let's go ahead and close up with what Steiner says. Steiner says his book, Occult Science, explains why that from which the Earth was formed may be designated as an old moon planet. Gonna pause for a moment. And this is another important notion. If you go back and look at the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, the old moon was the previous iteration of Earth existence before the modern era from which our known history derives. This was the time of the race of the Lemurians, according to the secret doctrine, the end of the old moon period and the beginning of the Earth period. That's what Steiner's alluding to here. But let's continue. He says, and this is why the world towards which the Earth aspires in the future may be called Jupiter. I'm going to pause again. Notice, remember, I spoke of the coming Jupiter period. That is the next iteration of the Earth. That is said to be coming to fruition in the cycles of time according to the Rosicrucian system. Steiner says here, the essential point is that by the old moon we understand a world long gone by, from which the Earth has formed itself by transformation, whilst we understand Jupiter in a spiritual sense to be a future world towards which the Earth is aspiring. And that's the end of the lecture. So this Jupiter period, this Jupiter Earth, that Steiner is speaking about. This is the future world man is destined to step into. It is a more spiritualized world. It is the spiritual evolution of mankind to the next level. That is what is supposed to happen. These dark powers that have control in this world right now, they want to usurp that and bind man in a physical existence in this eighth sphere reality. This is the prison planet of Gnostic thought. This is the simulation theory that they have been so readily pushing in the mainstream for people to latch onto. This is the Matrix that they want people to believe that we are living in. That's not what we're living in. Reality is not a simulation, ladies and gentlemen, but that's what they want people to believe because that's what they want to build. That is the nature of the eighth sphere. The New World Order that they want to bring to manifestation instead of this elevated version of the world. The future iteration of Earth and mankind, known in the Rosicrucian teachings as the Jupiter period. They're trying to usurp that. Now, many of you may not be familiar with this way of thinking. If you haven't been a listener of this broadcast for a long time, maybe you're being lost on some of these ways of thinking. Well, a lot of this is foundational to the secret doctrines of the mystery schools, of the secret society groups, of the occult fraternities. This Rosicrucian cosmo-conception is the best format that I've seen this laid out in for understanding from Western ideologies. You see, all of these different occult fraternities, they all talk about the same things. They just use different terms or descriptions for the same things. I find the Rosicrucian model is the most adequately expressed form of this for understanding in Western ways of thinking what's been laid out here as a format. So we've laid down some foundations for this in past broadcasts, and if you're not following along, I urge you, go look into this stuff for yourselves. Go do some reading. A good place to start would be Max Heindel's The Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception. It lays down the foundations of what the Rosicrucian order believes about reality, what it is found through the old occult sciences, and this is what is known as the Western stream of esotericism, or alchemy. Brought forward to the modern era, it's derived from Rosicrucianism. And Rosicrucianism, of course, is derived from older occult sciences, as they all are. I've gone through the pains of trying to track this stuff back to as early a time as I can. And I found some interesting connections and correlations along the way, but I encourage each of you to go look for yourself. Read about this stuff yourself. You can find most everything anymore in the public domain. In years past, these books and these writings about this stuff were very difficult to come across. You needed to have access to a very good Masonic library or Rosicrucian or Masonic publishing house or some such thing in order to access these materials, and you had to be a member of one of these occult fraternities in good standing to get it. That's not the case now. Most everything's been digitized and put online and is accessible in the public domain. You can find all of this and read about it yourselves and come to your own conclusions about what the true nature of all of it is. These are important concepts to consider. And like I said, whether you believe any of this stuff or not, that's irrelevant. They believe it. And if they believe it, we have a problem. If they pursue these ideas. Those people in positions of power in this world. It does ultimately affect all of us, and all we can do is take our individual stand on these things. We stand at the crossroads, each of us individually, and we must decide which path do we want to take. Do we want to take the transhumanist path and be bound to physicality, to this prison planet ideology, this Gnostic way of thinking, the demiurge and all of that goes with it? Or do we want to achieve our full potential as human beings and take the spiritual path and advance in that way? Each of us needs to make that individual choice. You can't skirt around that choice. You can't delay. You can't stand on the fence. At some point, you're going to be forced to make a decision. And there's no getting past that. It's an individual responsibility. They wanted us to abdicate our individual responsibility a long time ago. And many of us have. That's part of the social conditioning and programming that's gone on. But you can't ultimately escape it on a metaphysical level. It is an individual choice. So you can choose to abdicate your sovereignty to somebody else, or you can choose to take up your sovereignty and make a choice for yourself. Like I said, we've come to that crossroads. And in the very near future, we're going to see some big changes on the world stage. And a lot of it has to do with these spiritual forces and conditions of which we were speaking here today. And you may not see it as such on a conscious, physical, five senses, material world way here, but it is going on. And it does need to be considered. So with all of those things being said, I think we need to really, truly understand the message that's being conveyed here by Steiner. So with that being the case, I think we need to take into consideration the things that Steiner talks about here. We need to look at this notion of this etheric body and this etheric world around about us and take it seriously, because it does seem to have merits of truth to it. And having access to that can be transformative to society and culture, to mankind, to the world around us. Being able to understand and better implement things from this source field can help us to have a better future rather than the dark future that the technocrats and controllers of this world want for us. Anyway, folks, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I want to remind you I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good night now. The Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by Art of Play. Hi friends, if you have a curious mind like myself, you might be interested in checking out the things they have available at Art of Play. Not only do they have things like esoteric books that we speak on here all the time, and tarot card decks that we sometimes touch upon, they have all kinds of different amusements and curiosities, puzzles, games, the whole gamut of interesting things, curiosities if you will. So if you're looking for something like that, if you're trying to find a perfect gift for somebody that's a little outside the box, check out Art of Play at the link given in the video below.